Hey guys, Master Guns here. I wanted to take a minute to put a video together about CAV Strike Operations, the mecha combat game from Talons Games, formerly released as a Reaper Miniatures title. So CAV Strike Operations is the reimagining of the CAV universe under one of its original creators, John Walker, who now owns Talons Games and has re-released CAV, essentially. It's at its core still the same game, just with some, you could say, modernizations to it. It's not as clunky as the old game was, so it definitely plays very smoothly, it plays very well, and so the purpose of this video is to just take you through the basics of it, going from data card and the information available on the data card all the way through a turn of combat, so you can see exactly. So each combat unit in CAV has 2 available actions per turn, and these actions are listed on the action list table on your quick cheat sheet available for download for free from CAV, or from talonsgames.com. So your action lists are as follows. Those are starting with your free actions, and these are facing changes. A facing change basically is a free action because you can do it without having to spend an action on it, but there is a limit. You can't turn more than 90 degrees without spending an action. So if you just want to turn 45 degrees to line up a shot, that is a free action. You don't have to spend anything for that. Your repeatable actions, and these are actions that you can spend both of your actions on if you want, are move, facing change as mentioned before. This is if you want to go past 90 degrees, break from close combat, or regroup. And then your non-repeatable actions, these are the ones you can only do once per turn, is mount or dismount for infantry, combat, so this is making a combat attack roll, special action, certain CAVs have SAs or special actions that they're allowed to do, a target lock action, and a repair action. So those are your available actions, and now we'll go over the data card. We'll just go down it step by step. So this is a data card for a Dictator B, the model you see in the background there. So the Dictator B is the Rock Empire's basically superiority CAV. Now this CAV is kind of just the general blunt force hammer that the Rock Empire uses 99% of the time. It's very tough, it's got a lot of firepower, and it just generally excels at what it does, which is basically just bludgeon your opponent into submission. So going to the top, we have Dictator B, which is the name. The cross sword symbol below it is its action type, or its section type. In this case, the cross swords mean it belongs in an attack section. There's also fire support sections, which are like dedicated missile boats, recon sections, which are obviously the little small fast guys, and then specialist sections. There's also transport sections and aerial combat sections, but we won't be going over those just yet. Alright, so starting at the top, you see that CAV works with the damage track system. So at track 0, there, that's basically your CAV is fresh. It has no damage on it, it's fully combat capable all the way to track 9. And as you can see, your numbers degrade pretty significantly by track 9. So you're basically a shambling hulk of your former self at that point. Not still necessarily ineffective in combat, but just not where you were in the beginning or even around like track 4 or 5. So obviously move is your first option there, and in the parentheses there you see it says walker. That just means you're a walker type vehicle, and that's important because that'll denote what kind of terrain you can cover without taking penalties. So move is a repeatable action. You can spend both your actions to move twice in a turn. So in this case, his move action allows him to move 5 inches. So in one turn, if you wanted to spend both of your actions, you could move up to 10 inches. Then below that's your armor value. So the Dictator is pretty heavily armored at 8. That's better than average. So he can soak up a good bit of fire before he starts taking permanent damage. Below that's your close combat value. Close combat is not like it is in other games. You know, the CAVs don't have axes and swords and maces and things like that to swing at each other. Your close combat value basically is a breakdown of how effective your CAV is at maneuvering and gaining the upper hand while fighting in close quarters. That's not to say that doesn't include body checks and kicks and things like that, but the mechanic for that kind of thing isn't really built into the game. It's more of just this is how effective your vehicle is when it's inside of its minimum ranges for its weapons. And then below that you have your damage control. Now your damage control is your CAV's ability to repair itself. So in the CAV universe, they have these things called MREs, Micro Robotic Engineers. All combat vehicles carry them. Some are more effective than others. In this case, with your damage control, that doesn't start until track 2, which means you have to take 2 points of damage before you even have the option of using your damage control. And essentially that 4 means you have to roll a 10 plus on 2d6 and then add that 4, or I'm sorry, you have to beat a 10 plus on 2d6. So in this case, with a damage control rating of 4, you would need to roll a 6 or better in order to repair 1 point of damage. So going down below that are the weapons, the thing everybody likes. So this particular CAV has a pair of medium max. Their damage, or their RAV, which is the ranged attack value, is 6/2. Now what that is 6 is against hard targets, 2 is against soft targets. Soft targets being infantry and aircraft. So obviously, you know, they're for all intents and purposes like a gauze rifle if you play BattleTech. A MAC is a magnetic accelerator cannon, so it's definitely effective against hard targets, not so much against fast-moving or infantry targets. Below that, you have your light-guided missile. Now this is a missile that works only with an active target lock. It is a direct-fire weapon, but it's kind of a nice little bonus to be able to add if you do have line of sight on something and happen to have an active target lock. Below that, you have your indirect fire weapon, which is a light rocket 10. And this is basically just a fire and forget type thing. If you don't have line of sight on something, then, you know, just fire it, make the strike point roll, which we'll cover in a little bit, and, you know, just kind of cross your fingers, maybe do a little bit of damage to something. So it's kind of just just something to lob at the enemy while you advance and get your max into range. So below that, you have your special abilities and attributes. Now these are called your SAs. All right, so this particular CAV has the advanced targeting computer, which is really nice because with an active target lock, you get to add a +1 to any of your combat rolls. It has the ammo bin 1 ability, which means you get to basically ignore your first ammo critical hit. And then hard, just denoting that it's a hard target, so the first of the 2 numbers there in the parentheses on your weapons track. No, sorry, not your parentheses, but the first 2 numbers, the 6-2, separated by the slash. And then reinforced 1, I'll have to go back and double check what reinforced 1 is. I remember it being pretty good though. And then Wizzo. Wizzo is very, very fun. Wizzo is a weapons systems officer. So basically there's 2 pilots inside this CAV. One's the driver, and the other one solely operates the weapon systems. And this one's nice because it allows you to add a +1 to any of your combat rolls. So basically you have a driver who's concentrating on maneuvering the CAV, and a weapon systems officer who is only concentrated on bringing down the other guy. So your weapons also have SAs that you can see. I'm going to zoom in here. In this case, the medium max have Blaster 1. Now Blaster 1, what that is, that allows a critical hit on a 11 plus instead of a 12 plus. And that's a natural 11, so you have to roll 11 unmodified with any other SAs. So essentially, if you're making a target shot against somebody and you need 8s to hit and you roll an 11, then you get to deal potentially critical damage. You can see they have a minimum range of 1, which goes back up to the close combat value up there. So if you're under 1 inch, you're basically in base-to-base combat with your opponent, then you would reference your close combat value because your max and your guided missiles and your rockets aren't too close to do any damage. Then it has strike, and strike just means it is more effective against firing at hard targets. I think it gets a +1 for that. Your guided missiles have improved range, which means they're more effective in the long and extreme range bands. Limited ammo. What limited ammo does is it makes it so that your if you roll a critical fumble, which is snake eyes, then you roll the following d6 for that. On a 1 or a 2, that weapon is exhausted of ammo. So it's kind of a drawback, but it's meant as a points balancer. Minimum range for your guided missiles is 14 inches. So under 14 inches, they are ineffective. And then shock. Shock is nice because it allows you to potentially knock your opponent down or at least suppress them so they cannot advance towards you. This is very much a tactically minded game. So being able to prevent your opponent from attacking or gaining position is very valuable. And then your rocket launcher 10s down here have an AoE 1, so area of effect 1, so anything that these rockets land on will have to take a combat roll against within 1 inch. Indirect fire just means they're an indirect fire weapon, so you can lob them over hills and buildings and stuff. Limited ammo, just like up in the guided missiles. Minimum range 12. Ravage, which means they are more effective against infantry. And then smart. Smart's very cool because it allows the rockets to either increase their AoE by 1 at the decrease of their damage. So in this case, you'd be able to increase the AoE to 2 by reducing your damage to 2. Or you could decrease your AoE, well, not in this case, but if you had AoE or a smart AoE on a weapon that had AoE 2, then you could decrease the AoE to 1 and increase your attack value to like a 4, for example. So that's the basics of the data card there. I hope that's clear enough. Once you get a couple games under your belt, it all makes sense, I promise. So now we will go on to a round of test combat. We're on to the combat phase, everyone's favorite part. Okay, so just for the sake of keeping things going, we're going to say that the Dictator won initiative. So the Dictator currently has cover against the Starhawk, and say it wants to make an indirect fire attack with its rockets. The Dictator would then spend one of its actions to target lock the Starhawk. Now, what that's going to allow it to do is use its Advanced Targeting Computer 1 special ability and add a +1 to whatever it rolls. And it also has Wizzo, Weapon Systems Officer, which allows it to add a +1 as well. So whatever we need, we can add +2 to it. In this case, a strike point roll, or which is used for any time you make an indirect attack, is always a 10+. 9+ if you have line of sight to the target, if you only have, say, indirect fire weapons, for example. But in this case, it's a 10+, but we do get to modify that with a +2 for the Advanced Targeting Computer and the Wizzo. So we would technically hit on an 8. So we rolled a 4, so that was a failed strike point roll. So what you do at that point is take a D8, roll it as close to the model as possible, and then that's going to deviate 2 inches in the direction of that dice from its original target. That's basically going to land there. Now the AoE on those rockets is only 1, so that's a 1-inch bubble right there. Not nearly close enough to do any kind of damage to the Starhawk. So the Dictator just spent both of its actions, 1 to target lock and 1 to make an indirect fire attack, and so it is done. So now we're going to go over to the Starhawk. Alright, so the Starhawk, it does not have line of sight currently, and I don't think it's going to be quick enough, even with a double move, in order to make that attack, or get into range to attack. So we're just going to go ahead and spend both of its actions. Now it runs for 7, so that's going to give it a movement of 14. And you see it's pretty quick. So it'll use both of its actions, because moving is a repeatable action, to try and get into range to bring those rotary cannons to bear. Alright, so now we're going back to the Dictator. The Dictator will then spend 1 action, because there's not quite line of sight there. Partial cover, maybe. Yeah, you know what, that is partial. So we'll say the Dictator's just going to go ahead and it's going to stand still, and it's going to use another target lock action. Okay, so again, target locking the Starhawk. It has line of sight. We'll say it's definitely better than 50%. You know, maybe one of the arms is behind the rock, but you know that's you know, you can house rule that or whatever. So we'll say, just for the sake of keeping this going, that the rock now spends an action to target lock, which means it's going to get the Advanced Targeting Computer bonus, and it's also going to get its Wizzo bonus. That's going to be a +2 to whatever it hits, or whatever it needs to hit. So range on those max is 12. Current range between the models is 9. So we are at short range, so we only need a 6+ to hit with one of those max. And again, we get to add +2, so we could technically only roll a 4 and still make a successful hit. Alright, so we rolled a 6. We got exactly what we needed. Now, there is no margin of success here because we rolled exactly what we needed. So we need to rely on the strength of the weapon in order to deal any damage. So in this case, a 6, basically it's going to get thrown out. We do get to add the +2 for the Wizzo and the targeting computer. And then the RAV, the ranged assault value of that Mac, is 6. So it's a modified 8. So 6 + 2 for the SAs gives us 8. Now then we compare that against the armor of the Starhawk, and that Starhawk's armor is 7. So that's a margin of 1. And if you look here on the chart, a margin of 1 deals 1 point of damage to the defending model. So then you get your D10, put it on 1, and there we go. So now that Starhawk, when it next activates, is going to have it's going to be on its first damage track. Alright, so the Dictator spent an action to target lock and an action to fire, but we do have a second Mac. So let's go ahead and fire that second Mac. Again, that is 6+, and that is an excellent hit right there. That is a critical hit because the Dictator has Blaster 1. And if you remember when I went over the data card, Blaster 1 allows the Mac to crit on an 11 instead of a 12. So what that's going to allow us to do is add an additional D6 worth of damage. So this could potentially be very bad for the Starhawk. Alright, so that's going to give us an additional 2. Alright, so then we're going to modify that again with the Wizzo and the advanced targeting computer to a 4. Alright, so we needed a 6 to hit, so we'll take that out, so now our margin of success is 9. So with a huge margin of success of 9, we're going to then add the RAV, the ranged attack value of that Mac, which is 6, for a total of 15. Alright, so that 15 we're going to compare against the armor on the Starhawk. Now, since its damage was taken, the first point of damage was taken in this combat phase as well, it's still on the 0 damage track, so its armor is still 7. So if we subtract its current armor, which is 7, from this, that's going to give us an 8 on the ranged assault damage table. And an 8 gives us 2 damage points with a 2 there, which is a pilot check, and model is suppressed. So a pilot check is a 6+ roll. Sorry, let me add the damage first. So that's 3. So that's 3 damage tracks is taken this turn. And the pilot check is a 6+ roll on 2d6. And it did make it. If it didn't, then it would be knocked down. And basically, knockdown would just force it to spin an action to stand up next turn. It's essentially an action sink. And it is suppressed. So in a suppressed state, it cannot advance towards the Dictator. Now, that really would only be effective if it's an attack unit trying to move its way across the table to attack a fire support unit, for example. Right here, it really is not going to make a whole lot of difference. It just means he can't close the range right now until that suppression is removed. Alright, so something else to note is he took 3 points of damage, and per the rules, if you take 3 damage tracks in one turn, you roll on the critical damage table, which is here. So we'll roll for that now to see if there's any additional effects. He rolled a 6, so model is knocked down and stunned. So he's essentially out of the game for the next turn. So he's knocked down, meaning when he does reactivate, he has to spend an action to stand back up, limiting his ability to use target lock or make an attack or move, for example. But he's stunned, which means that he can't do anything when he does activate next, which basically gives the Dictator the ability to just move in on him and just try and plow his field, as it were. Alright, so being that he is now knocked down, he cannot activate. It's going to pass over him, and the Dictator is going to activate a second time. So now the Dictator's in a pretty good position. If it wanted to, it could potentially destroy that Starhawk right now, because you do get bonuses for shooting at something on the ground. So that Dictator could then move just out from behind. That's about 5 inches. And again, as long as he's not within a minimum range, you could technically back up and try and target lock, but then you wouldn't be able to fire. So this is essentially the best thing you could do. You could even go base to base. Attacking a target that's prone and stunned base to base would be it would be a good option, but right now his Macs still are capable of doing more damage. So instead of just repeating that turn over again, I think that gives you guys a pretty good idea of how the mechanics of the game work. Didn't unfortunately get to see the Starhawk do anything, but that's just kind of how the dice roll sometimes. But as you can see, the game is very, very fast. It's very brutal. Stuff can change in a heartbeat. I mean, even though the Starhawk is technically a more expensive CAV and better equipped to fight at close range in direct fire actions, the Dictator just got the upper hand on it and got a lucky shot, and now the Starhawk's on its back. So again, just to kind of give you an idea of the way the game works, very seldomly will you ever have just a one-on-one fight. 9 times out of 10, that Starhawk would have a section supporting it, and so would the Dictator, so there would be other things to consider. But this was just to kind of explain the mechanics of the game, essentially. So I hope you guys learned something. If you guys found this video helpful, let me know, and I'll look into doing a second one, maybe going into how to use the electronic warfare suites that some CAVs have, maybe bringing vehicles into it at some point. But just for a basic rundown of how combat between CAVs happens, this is it right here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.